52 years old, I thought grief would be the thing that broke me. I thought losing my husband after nearly 3 decades of marriage would leave the deepest scar. But grief wasn't what unraveled my life. It was a woman with paint on her hands and eyes that looked at me like she could see every secret I'd spent years hiding. The first time we met was at a funeral, my husband's funeral, and she asked me a question nobody else dared ask. One question that followed me home, sat beside me in the dark, and cracked open something I didn't know was still alive inside me. Looking back now, I realize that some love stories don't begin with certainty. They begin with discomfort. And the terrifying feeling that your entire life may not be what you thought it was. My name is Claire Bennett, and for most of my life I lived exactly the way people expected me to. I lived in Savannah, Georgia, where I owned a small antique restoration shop tucked along River Street. I repaired damaged furniture, restored forgotten mirrors, and spent my days bringing old things back to life. People knew me as dependable, practical, quiet. I had been married to Daniel for 28 years, raised 2 children, attended church every Sunday, and built the kind of life that looked respectable from the outside. And maybe that's why what happened next frightened me so badly. Because by 52 I believed I knew exactly who I was. I was wrong. Daniel died on a Tuesday morning. No warning. No dramatic final words. One moment he was standing in our kitchen complaining about gas prices while pouring coffee. The next moment he was on the floor and paramedics were rushing through our front door. People imagine grief arriving like thunder. Mine arrived like paperwork. Death certificates. Insurance forms. Condolence cards. Casseroles stacked inside my refrigerator. The house filled with voices and sympathy and carefully rehearsed kindness. And somewhere beneath all of it sat a feeling I couldn't confess to anyone. Not happiness. Never that. But relief. Daniel had not been a bad man. That's important to say. He was loyal and predictable and decent. We raised children together and shared holidays and built a comfortable life. But comfort and love are not always the same thing. Somewhere along the way we'd become 2 people maintaining a routine instead of a marriage. The funeral took place 3 days later beneath gray skies and steady rain. I remember the lilies. Too many of them. I remember the damp air and the sound of people clearing their throats while the pastor spoke about devotion and family and eternal peace. But mostly I remember her. She sat beside me during the service. Not family. Not church. A stranger. At first I assumed she'd mistaken her seat. But she stayed quietly through the prayers, hands folded in her lap. She looked maybe early 40s, with dark curls pinned loosely back and paint smudged near her fingernails like she'd come straight from work. There was something unhurried about her. Calm. Self-possessed. I noticed her because she didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with curiosity. After the service ended and people surrounded me with condolences, I eventually slipped outside beneath the church awning to breathe. Rain hammered the parking lot. That's when she appeared beside me. She held out a folded napkin. "You've got mascara here," she said softly. I wiped beneath my eye. "Thank you. I'm sorry for your loss." I gave the automatic response. "Thank you." For a second neither of us spoke. Then she tilted her head and asked a question that made my stomach tighten. "Did you love him?" she said quietly. "Or did you spend 30 years trying not to disappoint anyone?" I stared at her. The rain sounded louder. People do not ask strangers questions like that, especially not outside funerals. I felt heat rise into my face. "That's incredibly inappropriate." A small smile touched her mouth. "Maybe," she said. "But sometimes inappropriate questions get honest answers." I should have walked away. Instead I asked, "Do I know you?" "No." "Then why would you ask me something like that?" Her eyes stayed on mine. Because I recognized that expression. Something about her unsettled me. Not because she was cruel. Because she sounded certain. Before I could say anything else, my sister called my name from behind me. And when I turned back, she was already walking toward the rain. No goodbye. Just disappearing into gray weather like she had stepped out of nowhere and returned there again. I should have forgotten her. Instead, I spent the next week thinking about her voice. And hating myself for it. People talk about widowhood like loneliness suddenly arrives after loss. But the truth, I had been lonely long before Daniel died. The difference now was silence. No television downstairs. No footsteps in the hallway. Just me in a house full of routines that no longer had a purpose. 2 weeks later I returned to my shop. Bennett Restoration sat near the river, surrounded by old brick buildings and tourists who wandered in looking for history they could carry home. Normally the work soothed me. Wood restoration demands patience, attention. You learn to study damage carefully before trying to fix it. That afternoon I was repairing an antique oak dresser when the bell above the door chimed, and my heart dropped. It was her, the funeral woman. She stood inside my shop wearing paint-stained jeans and carrying a broken wooden frame. For a second we simply stared at each other. Then she smiled. "You look disappointed." "I'm surprised." "That's usually more polite." I set down my tools. "You ask disturbing questions. And you still remember me." "I remember being offended." Her laugh came soft and low. "Fair enough." She lifted the frame. "I need help." The frame was beautiful but cracked along one corner. I turned it over carefully. "Family piece. My grandmother's." I studied the damage. "This break isn't new." Her expression shifted. "No," she said. "Neither am I." I looked up. There it was again. That strange way she spoke, like every sentence carried another meaning beneath it. "My name's Evelyn," she said. "Claire." "I know." That startled me until she pointed toward the painted sign above my counter. Bennett Restoration. I almost laughed. Evelyn. The name fit her somehow. I quoted the repair price and expected her to leave. Instead she wandered through the shop studying restored mirrors and side tables. Her fingertips brushed polished wood. "You repair things people give up on," she said. "It's a business." "Maybe." She glanced at me. "Still feels personal." I didn't know how to answer that. She returned 3 days later. Then again the following week. Always with a reason. Questions about finishes, historic varnishes, repair techniques. And every visit stretched longer than the last. I learned she painted murals across Savannah and rented a small loft near Forsyth Park. She lived alone. Never married. Loved jazz music and late-night diners. And she asked questions nobody else dared ask. One afternoon while sunlight spilled through the front windows, she leaned against my counter and said, "When's the last time you did something selfish?" I frowned. "I have children." "That's not an answer." "I don't know." Her eyes stayed on me. "I think you do." That question followed me home. Because the truth embarrassed me. I couldn't remember. Not one reckless decision. Not one selfish choice. Not one moment that belonged entirely to me. And for reasons I still couldn't explain, that frightened me. More than grief. More than being alone. More than the woman who kept finding excuses to walk through my door. Evelyn became part of my weeks before I understood what was happening. At first I convinced myself it was coincidence. Savannah was small enough that people crossed paths. Still, coincidence began to feel like a weak explanation when she appeared at the same coffee shop where I spent Sunday mornings reading restoration journals, or when she somehow knew which local jazz trio played Thursday nights near the river. She never pushed herself into my life. That was the unsettling part. Evelyn simply appeared with an ease that made her presence feel natural. One chilly evening in November, she stopped by the shop just before closing. Rain streaked the windows, and I was finishing repairs on an old vanity mirror when the bell above the door chimed. "I brought peace offerings," she announced, lifting a paper bag that smelled like cinnamon and coffee. I looked up from my work. "Bribery." "Absolutely." She pulled 2 pastries from the bag and set them on my counter. "You work too hard, Claire. You don't know that." She glanced around the shop. "I know you've been here since morning because the same jazz station is still playing and you forgot to eat lunch again." I stared at her. "How do you know I forgot lunch?" "You get quiet when you're hungry." The answer unsettled me more than it should have. We sat together at my work table while rain tapped the glass and steam rose from our coffee cups. For the first time, the conversation drifted away from furniture and repairs. She told me about her murals, about spending years moving from city to city painting walls and public spaces. She spoke about color the way poets speak about love. "I like old surfaces," she said, brushing pastry flakes from her fingertips. "They carry stories. Fresh paint is easy. Restoring something weathered, that's harder." I laughed softly. "You sound like me." Maybe that's why I keep coming back. The words landed somewhere deep inside me. I looked down at my coffee. I don't think people usually keep coming back to me. Her gaze softened. That's because you hide. I looked up sharply. You barely know me. No, she said quietly. I know enough. The room felt smaller. Most people in my life described me as kind or responsible. Evelyn described me as hidden. And what frightened me was how accurate it sounded. That night after she left, I stood alone inside the shop long after closing. Her coffee cup remained beside mine, lipstick faintly visible near the rim. I should have washed it immediately. Instead, I found myself staring at it. That scared me. Not because of her. Because of myself. I began noticing things I had ignored for years. How empty my house felt, not from grief but from habit. How often I had performed happiness instead of feeling it. How my marriage, though respectable and steady, had been built more on loyalty than passion. And then guilt would rush in. Daniel had been good to me. What kind of widow questioned her life this quickly? The answer haunted me. A lonely one. A week later, Evelyn invited me to a small gallery opening, where one of her murals was being featured in a local arts exhibition. My first instinct was refusal. Crowds exhausted me. Social gatherings felt awkward since Daniel's death. But somehow I heard myself say yes. The gallery sat inside an old warehouse overlooking the river. Music drifted through exposed brick walls while people carried wine glasses and spoke too loudly about art. I nearly turned around twice before entering. Then I saw her. Evelyn stood beneath soft lighting wearing a black blazer streaked faintly with dried paint near the sleeve. Her curls fell loose tonight, framing her face. And for one strange second, I forgot to breathe. She noticed me immediately. That smile. God. I had spent weeks pretending not to notice her smile. You came, she said. You sound surprised. I've learned not to assume you'll say yes to things. I almost didn't. Her expression softened. But you did. She guided me through the exhibit, introducing me to artists and musicians whose names I instantly forgot. Truthfully, I wasn't paying attention to the paintings. I was watching her. The way she spoke with her hands. How people leaned toward her naturally. The warmth in her voice. At some point we escaped to the warehouse balcony overlooking the river. Cold air rolled off the water. Inside, music pulsed softly through the walls. I hate these events sometimes, she admitted. You seem comfortable. I'm good at pretending. That surprised me. You. Pretending. Her smile faded slightly. You think confidence means certainty. I didn't answer. She leaned against the railing. Claire. I spent years pretending I wanted lives that never fit me. Something in her tone made me still. What do you mean? She looked toward the dark river. My family wanted marriage, stability, predictable happiness. Her voice remained calm. I tried that. Tried. The word settled between us. Then she looked at me. And you? I swallowed. What about me? When's the last time you felt fully alive? The question hit harder than I expected. Because I knew the answer. And it terrified me. My pulse had started racing 20 minutes earlier standing beside her. I looked away. I don't know. I think you do. The city lights reflected across the river between us. And for the first time since Daniel died, I realized I was afraid of a feeling I couldn't yet name. After the gallery night, something shifted between Evelyn and me. Not dramatically. Not all at once. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, the change arrived quietly, settling between us like sunlight slipping across a floor. She continued visiting the shop, but now our conversations lingered in different places. We talked less about wood finishes and cracked frames and more about memory, fear, and the strange lives people build simply because they don't know how to build anything else. I found myself waiting for her. That realization came one Thursday afternoon when I checked the clock for the third time and felt disappointment when she hadn't appeared yet. I hated admitting that. At 52 years old, I had spent most of my life being practical. Waiting for someone felt reckless. Embarrassing even. Then she arrived. She looked tired that day, hair tied loosely back. Dark paint streaked across her wrist. She carried no broken frame and no convenient excuse. You look disappointed, she said. I was working. Terrible lie. I tried not to smile. She leaned against the counter and studied me with that unsettling attention I'd begun secretly craving. "Walk with me," she said. "I have work. You've been sanding the same drawer for 20 minutes. I looked down. She was right. The evening air outside carried the sharp bite of approaching winter. We walked toward the river while tourists drifted past and street musicians played somewhere nearby. Savannah looked beautiful at dusk, all old brick and soft light, but my awareness had narrowed strangely toward the woman beside me. We reached the waterfront and stood watching boats move through dark water. Neither of us spoke immediately. Then Evelyn said, "I almost didn't come today." That surprised me. "Why?" She shoved her hands into her coat pockets. "Because you're getting harder to stay casual about." The words landed hard. I stared at the river. "I'm not sure what that means." "I think you are." My heartbeat stumbled. The city sounds felt distant. Evelyn stepped closer, though not close enough to touch. "Claire, can I tell you something honestly?" I nodded. "When I met you at that funeral, I told myself I'd leave you alone after that day." I looked at her. "Then why didn't you?" A small smile crossed her face. "Because you looked lonely in a way I understood." The honesty in her voice made something tighten inside my chest. She continued quietly. "And because I liked you immediately, which annoyed me." The world seemed to pause. Nobody had said something like that to me in years. Not with sincerity. Not without obligation. I tried to steady my voice. "You barely knew me." "Maybe." Her eyes held mine. "But sometimes you recognize people before you understand them." The wind lifted loose curls around her face. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "I think you're scared of yourself, Claire." I looked away. "That's unfair." "Is it?" "You're making assumptions." "No." Her voice softened. "I'm noticing." I should have been angry. Instead, I felt exposed. Because somewhere beneath fear and confusion lived another truth I couldn't yet speak aloud. Being near her felt different. Not friendly. Not ordinary. Different. And I didn't know what to do with that. We stood in silence for several seconds before she spoke again. "You know something strange?" she asked. "What?" "I don't think you've been avoiding me." I crossed my arms. "No. I think you've been avoiding whatever happens when you're around me." My throat tightened. The river moved quietly beside us. Finally I said, "You make things complicated." Her expression softened. "No, Claire. I think life already was." That night I barely slept. Her words followed me home and settled into every quiet room of my house. I replayed the conversation while brushing my teeth, while lying awake in darkness, while staring at the ceiling above my bed. "You're scared of yourself." The sentence irritated me because it felt dangerously close to true. And then came the thought I had spent weeks refusing to examine. What if this wasn't grief? What if it wasn't loneliness? What if the reason my pulse changed around Evelyn had nothing to do with widowhood at all? I sat up in bed sometime after midnight, heart pounding, because suddenly memories appeared differently. The nervousness, the waiting, the way her smile lingered in my thoughts, the way I noticed her hands, and beneath all of it sat fear. Not fear of her. Fear of what she awakened in me. The next morning I opened the shop early hoping work would quiet my mind. Instead, Evelyn appeared before noon. No warning. No message. Just her standing in my doorway holding 2 coffees and wearing that same impossible expression. I looked at her and felt panic rise unexpectedly. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure what I wanted, and that terrified me more than anything yet. Claire kept her hands wrapped around the warm coffee cup, though she had forgotten to drink it. Evelyn stood only a few feet away, calm as ever, yet her presence unsettled the carefully ordered world Claire had spent years building. The shop felt unusually quiet that afternoon. Dust floated through thin strips of sunlight, and somewhere outside a truck rolled slowly past, its sound fading into the distance. Normally Claire found comfort in these familiar details, but today they only sharpened her awareness of the woman standing across from her. "You've been avoiding me," Evelyn said gently. Claire looked down at the cabinet she had been restoring. "I've been working." Evelyn tilted her head. "That's not the same thing." Something defensive rose immediately inside Claire. "You make a lot of assumptions. Only when people stop saying what they really mean." The answer landed harder than Claire expected. She reached for a sanding cloth, pretending concentration she didn't feel. I don't know what you want me to say. Evelyn remained quiet for a moment before stepping closer to the work table. Not enough to crowd her, just enough that Claire became painfully aware of the space between them. I want honesty, Evelyn said. That's all. Claire swallowed. The truth felt dangerous now because it no longer sounded abstract. For weeks she had been able to dismiss her reactions as grief, loneliness, confusion after loss. But standing there with Evelyn watching her so carefully, those explanations felt thinner than they used to. I'm not sure what's happening, Claire admitted quietly. For the first time, Evelyn's expression softened with something that looked less like confidence and more like relief. Good, she said. Claire frowned. Good. Yes. Evelyn leaned lightly against the counter. Because I'm not sure either. That startled her. You seem sure about everything. A faint smile touched Evelyn's mouth. That's the trick, Claire. People mistake confidence for certainty all the time. The shop fell silent again. Claire realized she was studying Evelyn's hands, the faint traces of paint still visible near her wrist, the small silver ring she always wore on her thumb. Such details should not have mattered. Yet somehow they did. Evelyn looked around the shop before speaking again. Can I tell you something without scaring you off? Claire hesitated. That depends. A quiet laugh escaped her. The first day I met you at the funeral, she paused. I noticed you before we even spoke. Claire felt her pulse shift. You didn't know me. No, Evelyn said softly. But you looked like someone carrying too much by herself. The words settled heavily between them. Claire looked away toward the front window. That's not unusual. Maybe not. Evelyn's voice lowered. But I kept thinking about you afterward anyway. The room suddenly felt smaller. No one had said something like that to Claire in years. Not plainly. Not without expectation attached to it. She forced herself to stay practical. Evelyn? I know, she interrupted gently. I know the timing is messy. I know you're still figuring things out. I'm not asking for anything. Then why say it? Evelyn held her gaze. Because pretending I don't feel it started feeling dishonest. Claire's breath caught. And for the first time since Daniel's death, fear and longing arrived together in a way she could no longer separate. Claire couldn't remember the last time honesty had frightened her this much. Evelyn's words stayed suspended between them, quiet but impossible to ignore. The shop suddenly felt too warm, too small, filled with things that had once grounded her, and now only reminded her how uncertain she felt inside her own skin. She turned away under the excuse of adjusting tools on the workbench, but her hands betrayed her. They trembled slightly. Evelyn noticed. Of course she noticed. I'm making you uncomfortable, she said softly. Claire kept her back turned. You're making me confused. That's not the same thing. The gentleness in her voice somehow made everything harder. Claire finally faced her again, crossing her arms like armor. I was married for 27 years. I know. I loved my husband. Evelyn nodded without interruption. And now suddenly, Claire struggled for language she didn't have. I don't know what any of this means. Silence settled between them. Not awkward silence. Careful silence. Then Evelyn spoke. Claire, I'm not trying to rewrite your past. Something in that sentence loosened the knot in her chest. I'm not saying your marriage wasn't real. I'm not saying grief isn't real either. Evelyn's voice remained steady. I'm saying people discover things about themselves at different times. Sometimes later than they expected. Claire looked down. That sounds convenient. No. Evelyn shook her head gently. It sounds terrifying. The word hit her harder than comfort would have. Terrifying. Because that was exactly what this felt like. She moved toward the front window and stared outside where evening traffic rolled past beneath fading sky. I don't understand why this is happening. Behind her, Evelyn stayed quiet for a moment. Maybe because understanding isn't the first step. Claire looked over her shoulder. Then what is? Evelyn held her gaze. Feeling it. The answer made her pulse stumble. She should have shut the conversation down right there. That would have been sensible. Safe. Instead she heard herself asking a question she had spent days avoiding. And what exactly do you think I'm feeling? For the first time, uncertainty crossed Evelyn's face. Not fear. Care. The kind that made her choose words carefully. I think, she began slowly, you feel something when we're together that you weren't expecting. Claire's throat tightened. And you. A faint breath escaped Evelyn. I stopped pretending about that weeks ago. The confession landed with startling weight. Outside, dusk darkened the street. Inside the shop, neither of them moved. Claire hated how aware she had become of Evelyn's presence. The warmth of her voice, the nearness of her body, the impossible steadiness in her eyes. It had been years since anyone looked at her this way, as if she were not merely surviving life but still capable of being fully seen inside it. You make this sound simple, Claire said quietly. Evelyn shook her head. No. I think it's probably one of the hardest things you've ever faced. Then why do you look so calm? A small smile touched her mouth. Because I'm not scared of what I feel. The words settled deep inside Claire. Not scared. She wished she could say the same. Before she could answer, rain began tapping softly against the windows. The sound filled the room and brought with it an odd stillness. Evelyn glanced toward the weather and then back at her. I should go, she said gently. The sentence brought an unexpected disappointment. Claire looked down at the untouched coffee cup still sitting near her tools. For reasons she couldn't explain, the idea of Evelyn leaving suddenly felt heavier than it should have. And that realization frightened her most of all. Claire watched Evelyn move toward the door. And something inside her resisted the distance before she fully understood why. Rain streaked softly against the shop windows while evening settled over Savannah, wrapping the street outside in blurred lights and shadows. For several seconds she said nothing. That had always been her instinct. Stay quiet, stay careful, let difficult emotions pass like weather. But lately silence no longer felt safe. Felt lonely. Evelyn. She stopped with her hand near the door and looked back. Claire swallowed. Don't leave like this. The words surprised both of them. Evelyn stayed still, giving her room to continue. Claire looked down at her hands. I don't know what I'm doing, she admitted quietly. That's the truth. I don't understand why being around you feels different or why I keep thinking about things I never questioned before. The rain filled the pause between them. I spent most of my life believing I understood myself, Claire continued. And now I feel like the ground moved underneath me. Evelyn stepped closer again, slowly, carefully. You don't have to figure everything out tonight. But what if I'm afraid to? A softness entered Evelyn's expression that nearly undid her. Then be afraid, she said. Just don't lie to yourself while you are. The honesty of it settled deep. Claire looked at her, really looked this time. At the quiet patience in her face, the paint still faintly visible on her wrist, the woman who had somehow walked into her carefully controlled life and made her feel awake in ways she hadn't expected. And suddenly the fear felt smaller than the loneliness she had carried for years. I wait for you, Claire confessed. The words came out barely above a whisper. Evelyn's breath caught. When you don't come by the shop, I notice. When something happens during my day, I think about telling you. And when you leave, Claire looked down again. The room feels different afterward. Neither of them moved. Then Evelyn crossed the remaining distance between them. Her voice was gentle when she spoke. Claire, look at me. She did. I'm not asking you to have answers, Evelyn said softly. I'm only asking you to be honest about what you feel. And for the first time, Claire stopped fighting herself. I think, her throat tightened. I think I'm scared because this matters. The words hung between them. Evelyn's eyes softened with something that looked dangerously close to relief. So am I, she admitted. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the city. Inside the shop, everything narrowed to the space between them. Claire became aware of her own heartbeat, of how close Evelyn stood now, of how impossibly natural it felt and how frightening that truth still was. Then Evelyn lifted her hand. Not touching. Just waiting. Giving her the choice. Claire stared at that open space for one long second before placing her hand into hers. Warm, steady, and somehow familiar. No dramatic certainty arrived. No perfect answers. Only a quiet rush of emotion that felt more honest than anything she had known in years. Evelyn looked down at their joined hands and smiled. There you are, she whispered. Claire laughed softly through unexpected tears. Maybe she had spent years mourning more than a husband. Maybe she had been mourning parts of herself she never allowed to live. The realization should have broken her. Instead, it felt strangely like relief. Rain continued tapping against the windows while they stood together in the fading light of the shop, not rushing, not pretending, allowing something fragile and real to exist between them. And for the first time in a very long while, Claire wasn't afraid of what came next. She was finally ready to find out.